sun was setting over Redstone Valley, casting a golden glow across the dusty streets of the small, lawless town. Redstone was the kind of place where men and women lived by their own rules, where trouble brewed in every corner, and where every day felt like a gamble. In the heart of town, the dusty saloon was always filled with the sound of laughter, clinking glasses, and the occasional shouting match, but tonight, the air was thick with tension. Jared Dusty Miller walked into the saloon with the confidence of a man who'd seen it all. He was a rugged cowboy, tall and lean, with a weathered face that told stories of hard times and long journeys. He wasn't a man to speak much, but his eyes were sharp, always watching, always calculating. Dusty had a reputation in these parts, not for being a troublemaker, but for winning poker games. He had an uncanny ability to read the room, to see through the bluffs, and to come out on top when the odds were stacked against him. Most people who played against him learned the hard way that Dusty always won. Tonight, however, wasn't just any game. The stakes were higher than usual. The notorious gambler Victor the Ace Harrison was in town. He was known for his ruthless ways, both at the poker table and in his personal dealings. Victor wasn't a man who played for fun. He played for control. And in this town, control meant everything. The game was set in a back room of the saloon, away from the prying eyes of the regular patrons. The players sat around a worn table, their eyes flicking nervously toward the door as the game began. Victor sat at the head of the table, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth as he shuffled the cards. He was a tall man, dressed in fine clothes with an air of superiority that made most men uneasy. But Dusty wasn't intimidated. He'd played with the best, and he was ready for whatever this game had to offer. As the cards were dealt, Dusty could feel the tension rise. This was no ordinary game. It was a battle of wills. The other players were good, but Dusty had a feeling that Victor wasn't just playing for money tonight. There was something more behind his eyes, something cold and calculating. The players exchanged glances, and as the game went on, Dusty started to understand what was at stake. It wasn't just about gold and silver. No, Victor had something else in mind. He wasn't just gambling money. He was gambling his daughter. At first, Dusty thought he must have misheard. But when Victor threw down a card and leaned forward with a smirk, his words made it clear, "If I win, she's mine." Victor's daughter, Emily Harrison, was standing by the bar, her eyes downcast as she quietly served drinks. She had the kind of beauty that made heads turn, but she wasn't one to flaunt it. Her auburn hair was tied up in a simple braid, and her eyes, though a deep shade of green, often held a look of quiet frustration. Emily wasn't the kind of woman to be easily won in a poker game, but in this town it seemed nothing was out of reach for someone like Victor Harrison. Victor's words hung in the air like a heavy storm cloud. Dusty's jaw tightened, and for the first time that night he felt the weight of the game settle into his chest. He hadn't come here for this. He'd come to win money, not a person. But there was no turning back now. If he played for all of it. Emily's eyes met Dusty's for a brief moment, and for the first time, Dusty saw the fear in her eyes. She didn't want this. She didn't want to be treated like a prize in her father's game. But she was trapped just like everyone else in Redstone. Victor had a way of making sure people did what he wanted, whether they liked it or not. As the game continued, Dusty's mind was in turmoil. He wasn't a man who enjoyed taking risks for the sake of others, but something about the way Emily stood there, watching the game unfold, made his resolve firm. He wasn't going to let her become a pawn in her father's cruel game. The cards fell one by one, and the tension in the room grew. The players were sweating, their hands shaking as they placed their bets. Dusty remained calm, his poker face as unreadable as always. He had played in games where the stakes were high, but this felt different. This wasn't just about money. It was about a woman's freedom. Finally, it came down to the last hand. Dusty's hand was strong, but Victor wasn't going to give up without a fight. The two men stared at each other across the table, neither one willing to back down. Dusty knew this was the moment. He could feel the weight of every decision he'd ever made pressing on his shoulders. With a steady hand, Dusty laid down his cards, revealing the winning hand. The room fell silent as Victor's eyes narrowed, realizing he had lost. Victor's anger boiled over, his fist slamming down onto the table. But Dusty remained calm, his eyes unwavering. He had won, but it wasn't over. The terms of the game had been clear. Emily was now his responsibility. And whether he liked it or not, he had to claim her. Victor's face was a mask of fury, but Dusty could see the glimmer of something else in his eyes. Respect? Maybe. Or just the cold acceptance of defeat. He didn't say a word, but he didn't need to. His daughter was no longer his to control. Emily stood still, her expression a mix of disbelief and humiliation. She didn't want to be claimed by anyone, especially not a man she didn't know. But there was nothing she could do. The game was over and her fate was sealed. Dusty stood up from the table, his tall frame casting a shadow over the room. He walked toward Emily, his voice low but firm. "You don't have to go with me, but I promised I'd take you out of here. And that's what I'm going to do." Emily didn't know what to say. She had no choice. Her father had made sure of that. But as she looked into Dusty's eyes, something inside her shifted. He wasn't like the other men she'd known. He wasn't here to control her. He was here to protect her, even if she didn't understand it yet. As Dusty reached out to take her arm, Emily hesitated for a moment before finally nodding. She had no idea what her future would hold, but she knew one thing. She couldn't stay in Redstone. Not under her father's thumb, not in a life where her worth was measured by a poker game. With one final glance at the poker table and the angry, defeated look on her father's face, Emily walked toward the door. Dusty followed her, and together they stepped out into the night, leaving Redstone behind. Dusty had won the game, but he hadn't won her heart. Not yet. That would take time, patience, and a journey that neither of them could predict. But as they walked into the darkness, one thing was certain. Neither of them would ever be the same again. The air was still and quiet as Dusty and Emily rode away from Redstone. The only sounds that broke the silence were the rhythmic clip-clop of their horses' hooves and the occasional rustle of wind through the tall grass. The darkened landscape stretched out before them, an endless expanse of wilderness that seemed as wild and untamed as the people who lived in it. Emily sat tall in the saddle, her back straight, trying to keep her emotions in check. She had never expected her life to change like this. In a single moment, everything she had known had been swept away. Her father's words, the poker game, the promise Dusty had made to take her away from it all felt like a strange dream. She was used to feeling like a pawn in her father's plans, but now, she was stuck in a new situation with a man she hardly knew. Beside her, Dusty rode silently, his expression unreadable. He hadn't said much since they left Redstone, and Emily didn't know what to make of him. He wasn't like her father, that much was clear. He wasn't arrogant or cruel, but he wasn't soft either. There was something strong and steady about him, like the land they were crossing. He wasn't a man who would be easily swayed, and in a way that made him more intimidating than any of the men she had known. As the day wore on, the landscape began to change. The flat plains of Redstone gave way to rolling hills and thick patches of forest. Dusty had been quiet for most of the ride, but finally he broke the silence. "We'll stop for the night up ahead," he said, his voice low but firm. "We need to rest and get some supplies. Can't keep going without food or water." Emily nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She had no idea where they were going or what the next step in her life would be. She wasn't even sure if she trusted Dusty yet, though she couldn't deny that he had kept his word. He had taken her away from Redstone, away from the man who had controlled her every move. And for that she was grateful, even if she didn't understand why he had done it. Later they arrived at a small creek, its water clear and sparkling in the fading light. Dusty dismounted and tied their horses to a nearby tree, then began to set up camp. Emily watched him for a moment, his movements efficient and practiced like he had done this 100 times before. He seemed so calm, so at ease in this wild world, while she felt like a stranger to it all. As Dusty started a fire, Emily couldn't help but feel a growing sense of discomfort. This wasn't the life she had imagined for herself. She had always dreamed of escaping the shadow of her father, but now she found herself in the wilderness with a man who was a stranger to her, unsure of where they were headed. She had no family here, no friends, no place where she truly belonged. When Dusty handed her a tin cup of water, she accepted it with a quiet, "Thank you," but didn't say much more. She wanted to ask him where they were going, what his plans were, but the words wouldn't come out. She wasn't sure she wanted to know the answers. For now it was easier to stay silent, to let the fire crackle and the night settle in around them. As the night grew darker, Dusty finally spoke again. "You don't have to thank me," he said, his voice softer now. "I said I'd take you away from Redstone, and I did. No strings attached." Emily turned to look at him, her brow furrowing. "Then why are you doing this?" she asked. "I don't understand. You could have kept the money, the winnings. Why take me with you?" Dusty looked at her, his dark eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. "It wasn't about the money. It was about something else," he said slowly. "I don't like the idea of anyone being forced into something they don't want. Your father may have made that bet, but I didn't." His words hung in the air, and Emily felt a knot of confusion in her chest. She couldn't quite figure him out. He wasn't like the men she'd known before. There was no arrogance in his voice, no bitterness. It was as if he truly believed in doing what was right, even if it meant stepping into a situation that wasn't his fight. "I don't know what you expect from me," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know you. I don't even know where we're going." Dusty shifted on the log he was sitting on, his gaze steady. "We're going wherever you want to go. I'm not forcing you to do anything." Emily looked at him, unsure of whether to believe him. But there was something in his eyes that made her hesitate. For the first time, she began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, Dusty wasn't like the others. Maybe he was offering her a choice, something she had never had before. The next day, they continued their journey, traveling through rugged terrain and small, sleepy towns. Along the way, Dusty showed Emily the ropes, how to handle a horse, how to find food in the wild, how to survive in the vast open land. Emily had never done anything like this before, and at first she resisted, but slowly she began to realize that this was a world where she could be free. No one was watching her. No one was telling her what to do. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just someone's daughter. She was herself. Dusty, too, started to open up. He told Emily about his past, about the things he had done, the mistakes he had made. He spoke of a woman he had loved once, a long time ago, and how he had failed her. He talked about running away from his mistakes, always trying to outrun the guilt that weighed on him. He never spoke much about his family, but Emily could tell that he was a man who had carried burdens just like she had. As the days passed, Emily began to see Dusty in a different light. He wasn't a hero, not in the traditional sense, but he was a man who had his own battles to fight, and somewhere along the way she started to admire him. He was strong, steady, and he had a quiet way of showing kindness without expecting anything in return. One afternoon, they stopped in a small town for supplies. As Dusty tied the horses outside the general store, Emily couldn't help but overhear the gossip of the townsfolk. "Did you hear?" one woman whispered. "The cowboy who won the gambler's daughter. I heard he's taking her away." Emily felt a rush of heat in her cheeks. She didn't want to be the subject of anyone's gossip, but there was nothing she could do. She glanced at Dusty, who was busy speaking with the storekeeper, unaware of the whispers around them. For a moment she felt the old sense of shame, the feeling that she didn't belong anywhere. But then she remembered what Dusty had said. She wasn't here because she had been forced to be. She was here because she had chosen to leave. The ride that night was quieter than usual, but the silence between them felt different now. It wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, almost like they were becoming two parts of the same journey. Emily still had questions, still didn't fully understand her feelings for Dusty, but she knew one thing. She wasn't the same person she had been when she left Redstone. By the time the sun set, Emily had come to a quiet realization. She had no idea what the future held, but with Dusty by her side, she no longer felt lost. She felt like she had a chance to write her own story, to take control of her own fate, and that, more than anything, was worth the journey.